That Monday morning was the last time Mommy got to talk to her baby.
On April 1st, 2024, 19-year-old Sade Robinson was getting ready for a first date. She had arranged to meet 33-year-old Maxwell Anderson for dinner. They were seen together that evening, first at a restaurant and later at another location. At the time, there was nothing to suggest that this ordinary first date would soon become the beginning of a missing person investigation. But sometime after midnight, something changed. Sade's car was no longer where it should have been. Her phone was moving through Milwaukee in the early morning hours, while surveillance cameras captured fragments of a journey investigators would later have to piece together. By the following day, Sade was missing. And investigators were left with one crucial question. What happened during those missing hours? Surveillance footage, phone records, vehicle movements, and witness accounts would gradually help investigators reconstruct the night and reveal that the first date was only the beginning of a much larger investigation. Welcome back to Homegirl Missing. Today, we're following the timeline of Sade Robinson's final night and the clues investigators used to piece together what happened after she left that first date. The night started simply enough. Around 5 p.m., Sade met Anderson for dinner before the two continued to another bar. At that stage, nothing publicly reported suggested the evening was heading somewhere unusual. By 9:24 p.m., location data placed Sade's phone at Anderson's residence. The trail later grew harder to follow. Shortly before 1 a.m., her car left the property, passed her apartment, and continued north toward Waremont Park. Surveillance cameras there captured a person moving down a steep bluff toward Lake Michigan, then making several trips between the lower area and the top. By 4:36 a.m., Sade's phone had stopped transmitting after its battery died. The following morning, investigators found her car burning in a parking lot, with her clothing still inside the trunk. That same day, a human leg was discovered roughly 2/3 of the way down the bluff. Then investigators found another important piece of footage. The man last seen with Sade appeared near the burning vehicle, tossed a lighter inside, and calmly boarded a city bus. But Sade Robinson wasn't just a name on a missing person alert. Long before this night, she was someone's daughter, someone's favorite coworker, a student with a plan. So before we go any further, you need to know who she really was. Sade Robinson had already built a life shaped by resilience and family. Born May 10, 2004, in Vicksburg, Mississippi, she moved to Milwaukee with her mother, Sheena Scarborough, before turning 2. During childhood, hearing problems led to an outpatient procedure for ear tubes, and speech delays followed. With help from speech pathologists, Sade eventually overcame them. Her childhood also stretched between 2 states. She spent time in Milwaukee and Florida, where her father, Carlos Robinson, lived. Although her parents were never married, they maintained a co-parenting relationship and worked to keep Sade surrounded by family support. During 7th grade, she relocated to Florida to live with her father. That arrangement changed when Sade was about 15. Her mother became concerned about her declining mental health and believed the instability around her father's home was becoming unsafe. In 2019, Sade returned to Milwaukee permanently, choosing to live with her mother and begin shaping the future she wanted for herself. By the time she disappeared, that future was already taking form. Sade studied criminal justice at Milwaukee Area Technical College and stood only weeks from completing her Associate of Arts degree. She also hoped to join the U.S. Air Force, inspired by her grandfather, a retired Navy veteran, and her uncle, who served in the Army. Her family saw that ambition as part of what made her stand out. Outside school, Sade worked as a cashier at Pizza Shuttle and also held a second job at the Wisconsin Country Club. People around her remembered her for her laugh, kindness, and willingness to help others. At Pizza Shuttle, that included giving leftover food to unhoused people outside the restaurant.
And she's a great worker. She comes in on time, she smiles. Every time she would work with me, I'd say, "What's up, Sade?" And she'd go, "The sky, Mark." She always said it, and now I miss it.
She had plans, relationships, and a direction she was actively pursuing. Then, just weeks before graduation, all of that was interrupted. By the time Milwaukee residents were searching for answers, investigators were working backward through a night that had started routinely. It began with a text. That first message would eventually become one of several markers used to reconstruct Sade Robinson's final known movements. At 4:15 p.m., Sade messaged a number later associated with Maxwell Anderson, saying she wanted seafood and proposing twisted fishermen in Menomonee Valley. Around 5 p.m., Sade and Anderson arrived at Twisted Fisherman, ordered food and drinks, and spent roughly 90 minutes together. Nothing visible on the footage indicated an argument or confrontation, and Anderson appeared familiar with the setting from his previous work there. Just before 6:30 p.m., they left in Sade's 2020 Honda Civic and continued into downtown Milwaukee. Their next stop was Duke's on Water at 158 East Juneau Avenue. They drank, joined a game of beer pong, and socialized while Anderson took additional shots and stepped outside briefly around 8:30 p.m. At 9:03 p.m., cameras recorded the pair leaving together. They then traveled toward Anderson's residence on South 39th Street, on the city's south side. Sade's Life 360 location sharing provided another checkpoint. At 9:24 p.m., her phone registered at Anderson's home, where a neighbor's camera captured two people entering through the side yard. After that, the record becomes less complete. A light came on inside, and around 11:25 p.m., someone exited through the side yard before returning roughly 22 minutes later. The footage did not explain what had happened inside the residence, leaving investigators with activity outside the house, but no clear account of the hours spent there. At that point, the investigation had a sequence of digital checkpoints, but those locations did not explain what happened between them. The vehicle then followed a route investigators could later reconstruct through GPS data. It traveled through downtown, past Sade's apartment, and reached Pleasant Valley Park in Riverwest at about 1:33 a.m. From there, the car continued to Waremont Park in Cudahy, arriving around 2:45 a.m. Footage from Cudahy High School showed the vehicle heading toward the park's pump house, and at 3:02 a.m., a figure descended the bluff toward Lake Michigan, making repeated trips between the shoreline and higher ground. At 4:31 a.m., the Honda left Waremont Park. Minutes afterward, Sade's phone stopped transmitting when its battery died, with the final location placing it near the park. Each location added another piece to the map: the restaurant, the bar, Anderson's residence, Pleasant Valley Park, and finally Waremont Park. Yet location data could show where the vehicle traveled without revealing what happened at each stop. The cameras offered fragments, the phone supplied timestamps, and the car connected those points. What remained was the gap between those pieces of evidence, especially what occurred after Sade and Anderson reached the house. By April 2nd, investigators were no longer dealing with a missing person report alone. At 7:32 a.m., Milwaukee firefighters responded to a vehicle blaze near 30th and Lisbon, roughly 10 miles from Maxwell Anderson's residence. The burned vehicle turned out to be Sade Robinson's Honda Civic, and inside the trunk, investigators located clothing consistent with what she had worn on the date, along with remnants of a cell phone. That same morning, another clue surfaced miles away. Workers in Cudahy reported damage to a gate at Waremont Park, indicating that a vehicle may have forced its way through to reach a service road near the pump house. Then, at 5:29 p.m., a park visitor reported finding part of a human body approximately 2/3 of the way down the 100-foot bluff near the Lake Michigan shoreline.
And Cudahy police say they were the first to respond just before 5:30 p.m. Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office immediately determining the leg belonged to a human.
The discovery gave investigators another reason to examine Sade's disappearance. Her pizza shuttle co-workers had already become concerned when she failed to appear for work, contacting police around 9 p.m. the previous evening. Officers conducted a welfare check at her apartment, but the search did not reveal evidence indicating foul play. On April 3rd, Milwaukee police issued a critical missing person alert, while the Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office, which was investigating the remains found at Waremont Park, received notification about Sade. Preliminary DNA testing then provided an important connection. The remains were identified as belonging to a black woman, approximately 5 feet tall, consistent with Sade's physical description. The criminal complaint described the leg as having been sawn off at the hip, adding another disturbing detail to an investigation that was rapidly expanding beyond the missing person case. Sheriff Danita Ball later emphasized that investigators wanted to pursue justice for the victim. Meanwhile, the search moved beyond official investigators. Family members, friends, and community volunteers began checking locations mentioned in early police reports, including areas around the burned Honda. The burned Honda Civic quickly became one of the investigation's most important physical clues. Milwaukee firefighters reached a parking lot at 1800 North 29th Street at 7:32 a.m. on April 2nd, where a witness reported seeing a white man wearing a gray hoodie and carrying a tan backpack leave the vehicle before dropping a lighter inside. Fire had heavily damaged the cabin, but investigators still recovered Sade Robinson's ripped jeans, white shirt, and fragments of an iPhone from the trunk. Video from the Milwaukee County Transit System soon gave detectives another lead. At 8:23 a.m., a man matching the witness description boarded a bus, later identified as Maxwell Anderson, and exited near his residence about 12 minutes afterward. On April 4th, detectives obtained a warrant for Anderson's residence in the 3100 block of South 39th Street. Inside, they documented blood on a bedroom comforter and along walls leading toward the basement, gasoline containers in the garage, a knife in the kitchen sink, and a large black axe mounted in the living room. Investigators also located women's clothing concealed between a basement support beam and the foundation. More than 50 knives were reportedly recovered from the house, yet early testing produced an unexpected complication. The blood found inside did not match Sade's DNA. Meanwhile, the search for Sade continued across Milwaukee County and beyond. On April 18th, a torso and arm washed ashore on a beach in South Milwaukee. Then, on May 11th, another right arm was discovered in Waukegan, Illinois. Both were believed to belong to Sade. The Milwaukee County Sheriff's Office worked alongside 13 other agencies and Bruce's legacy to search Lake Michigan. Those efforts produced no additional remains, leaving investigators with evidence spread across multiple locations, and a case that was becoming increasingly difficult to separate from the water surrounding Milwaukee. At 1:16 p.m., on April 4, 2024, investigators took Maxwell Stephen Anderson into custody during a traffic stop near his Milwaukee residence. The arrest followed surveillance evidence and the apparent match between his clothing and the man seen near Sade Robinson's burned Honda. Anderson was 33 years old, born November 1, 1990, and had spent his life in Milwaukee. His connection to the city's nightlife was well established. Anderson worked as a bartender at places including Victor's Nightclub and Twisted Fisherman, where he interacted regularly with customers and was described by some as personable. Away from those workplaces, however, court records documented repeated encounters with law enforcement. A 2014 case resulted in a disorderly conduct conviction after a physical confrontation at a bar. 5 years later, prosecutors charged Anderson with battery, disorderly conduct, and second-degree reckless endangerment after an incident involving his sister's boyfriend and a baseball bat. He ultimately pleaded guilty to lesser offenses. Those records gave investigators a documented history of confrontations, particularly around social settings. Anderson was unmarried and had no children, although he maintained connections with relatives. A woman who previously dated him told 12 News that she found him unreliable, recalling unfinished construction projects at his home, including a large hole in the backyard. She also remembered him inviting her downstairs to see the basement, which she described as creepy, though she chose not to enter. None of those earlier cases established what had happened to Sade. The evidence in the current investigation had to stand on its own. During questioning, Anderson invoked his right to remain silent, leaving detectives without an account for the blood documented inside his residence, the surveillance footage, or his movements around the burned vehicle. Then investigators examined a message sent from Anderson's phone. At approximately 10 a.m. on April 2nd, he texted Sade's phone asking, "How's your day going?" prosecutors later argued that the message could represent an effort to make the situation appear ordinary and potentially conceal what had already happened. Anderson offered no explanation for it during interrogation, leaving the message to be interpreted alongside the growing collection of physical, digital, and surveillance evidence. On April 12, 2024, the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office charged Maxwell Anderson with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, and hiding a corpse. His bail was set at $5 million, and the homicide count carried the possibility of life imprisonment without parole. According to the criminal complaint, Anderson intentionally killed Sade Robinson, dismembered her, and scattered her remains in an effort to conceal the crime. But significant questions remained unanswered. Investigators had not identified a murder weapon, and the condition of the recovered remains prevented authorities from determining or publicly disclosing the exact cause of death. The prosecution also had no established motive. Anderson and Sade had only limited prior contact, leaving investigators without a clear explanation for what might have triggered the alleged killing during their April 1 date. Then, a confidential informant provided a disturbing account. Court filings state that the informant visited Anderson's home on March 5th and saw his basement covered with plastic sheeting around a sanitation sink, ceiling, floor, and walls. The informant claimed Anderson said he planned to use a gun to kill Sade and bring her into the basement. That allegation appeared to suggest planning weeks before Sade disappeared, but prosecutors recognized that the claim needed support. Assistant District Attorney Ian Vance Caron noted that the alleged premeditation seemed unusual without corroborating evidence. So the informant's story became another piece of the case, but not one investigators could simply accept without verification. The trial of Maxwell Anderson began with a case built largely around circumstances rather than a single piece of direct evidence. On May 27, 2025, the state of Wisconsin versus Maxwell Anderson opened in Milwaukee County Circuit Court before Judge Laura Crello. The following day, both sides presented sharply different interpretations of the evidence. Prosecutor Ian Vance Caron told jurors that Anderson intentionally killed Sade Robinson and tried to make her disappear.
To Sade Robinson was an intentional homicide. There is no question behind the intent, and there's no question about the person responsible for doing it. The killer is him. He's the last person to be with her, the last one.
The defense took another approach. Attorney Anthony Cotton argued that investigators never recovered Sade's blood from Anderson's home, never identified a murder weapon, and could not establish a specific cause of death. One photograph taken from Anderson's phone became particularly significant. Prosecutors described it as showing Sade face down on a couch with Anderson's hand on her, while the defense questioned whether the image proved she was already deceased. Detectives also testified about knives, an axe, and a gray hoodie recovered during the investigation. Medical examiner Dr. Lauren Decker described the autopsy as unusual because investigators had to work with incomplete remains over several months. The recorded cause of death was homicide by unspecified means. On June 5th, after closing arguments, jurors began weighing the case. Prosecutors maintained that the accumulated evidence established Anderson's responsibility, while Cotton pointed to the absence of a reported struggle from neighbors and argued that Anderson's behavior on the bus did not resemble someone attempting to hide his identity. The verdict would now depend on which interpretation of those gaps the jury found convincing. The jury returned a unanimous guilty verdict on June 6, 2025, finding Anderson guilty on all 4 counts: first-degree intentional homicide, mutilating a corpse, hiding a corpse, and arson. Anderson remained stoic as Judge Crello read the verdict. In the hallway, Sade Robinson's family, including her mother, Sheena Scarborough, embraced as the weight of the decision finally sank in. With the homicide conviction carrying a mandatory life sentence without parole in Wisconsin, the verdict brought the family a measure of closure, but it could never undo what they had lost.
Are you able to finally have some relief tonight after fighting so hard for justice, knowing that this man who murdered your baby is going to be spending decades in jail?
It's definitely it's a weight It's such a heavy weight. It's never gonna be the same. Even for Adriana, like my mom, that's our best friend. That's my baby. That's my angel. And there's no such thing as justice. Like, we don't have her, but.
For me, what lingers long after the timeline and the verdict isn't the horror, it's the girl. Sade Robinson was a 19-year-old who handed leftover pizza to strangers sleeping outside, laughed in a way people remembered, and was just weeks from a degree she'd worked hard for. She had Air Force dreams and a family who still says her name like a prayer. If this story moved you, let her name be a reason to hold your people a little tighter tonight. And if you believe Sade deserves to be remembered, please subscribe and help us keep her light alive.